Well, good morning to the Leviticus Musketeers, as we are now. It's better than the Three Stooges, I guess. My mother grew up in Portsmouth, which is a harbour city on the south coast of England from which many, many ships set sail to come to this part of the world. And in the early voyages, scurvy was a constant problem. No fresh fruit, no fresh vegetables, lack of vitamin C. And sometimes people could go for many months without noticing anything wrong, but then the symptoms would slowly start to emerge, the kind of easy bruising, kind of bleeding of the gums, fatigue, and so on. What we want to think about this morning is what are the long-term impacts if Leviticus is not part of the diet in churches? Or maybe another way to put that is, what essential nutrients do you find here that you don't find anywhere else? What do you think, Katie?
It's a very good question. I think one of the key nutrients of Leviticus that we're missing, because Leviticus is not part of our diets, is the relationship between purity and holiness. And wait for it, there's something more. How purity is about the whole of life. I think it's part of our church culture that we have reduced purity to sexual purity, whereas sex is one small part of the whole of our lives. Leviticus teaches us that purity is all-encompassing, from how we love God, to how we love our families, to how we love our neighbours, to how we love the nations. It encompasses all of our relationships and the whole of our life. I think that's a really key nutrient.
And I think I really agree with that idea about purity. The other aspect of that, I think, and this is, I know you talk about this, Jeff, is that when people think Leviticus, they think atonement. And if you lose purity, you lose the issue of sin that we're dealing with and the wholeness of the gospel. That is, I think it's very easy for salvation to be about God forgives my sin so I can live however I want. But if purity is bound up in the gospel that we're preaching, that Christ redeems us from the sin that dwells in us and in the world around us, then that's a much richer gospel, and it's easier for us to guard against that kind of cheap grace that Bonhoeffer talks about, I think, as well.
I think picking up on some of the stuff we talked about a couple of weeks ago, I think the whole notion of purity not just brings our kind of spiritual self, if we can use that, or things that we think about, or even sin, but our bodily selves as well. That God's transformation has to extend to all of those facets of who we are as people. And in fact, all those dimensions of our personhood become so crucial as we live out lives of faithfulness for God. It's not just what we think, but what we do, our bodies, our insides, it's everything. Which makes so much sense of kind of Paul's language, doesn't it? Kind of anticipating the day where we'll be made entirely new. Because only then can we inherit the kingdom of God, when there's that full transformation.
And not just for ourselves, but for the whole world. Like there's a cleansing, there's foreshadowed in the flood as well, that's picked up in the New Testament, that the whole world needs to be cleansed. I can't be clean on my own while I'm living in an impure world. The whole world needs to be cleansed. We all need to be cleansed in order that we can live pure, holy lives for God.
Which is going to come up in the passage you're preaching on, isn't it?
Hopefully, yes, it is, isn't it?
Yeah, where there are some things that actually defile the very land that we live on. So again, it's not just about me and my sin or the things I do wrong. It's not even about us and the things we might do wrong, but actually the impact that has on the physical world. Our sin is, in some sense, like we've seen in Leviticus, a much bigger problem, and our impurity a much bigger problem maybe than we anticipated, which highlights the need for God to do something greater to fix all of that.
Very true, but in that, it also highlights the consequences. So building on what you've just said and building on what Carl just said, we think of atonement for Leviticus, whereas right at the end of Leviticus 15, we find out what the consequence of our impurities are and how drastic and serious that consequence is, which points to the need for that purification, not of just us as God's people, but the whole world, for God to restore his presence among his people again. So I think how you view purity and holiness affects how you view biblical theology. I think that's really key.
And really has a powerful impact on our picture of Jesus, doesn't it? That again, our picture of him just becomes so much richer and deeper. Our hearts ought to be moved so much more in responses of worship and adoration for all that God has accomplished, is accomplishing, and will accomplish. So there you go. Scurvy, if you don't have enough vitamin C. Other issues, perhaps, if you don't have enough vitamin L. So there you go. Go forth and multiply and bring vitamin L to your churches. See you next time.